A heavy hand slams a terrified teenager against a diner counter, the cold metal of handcuffs biting into his wrists over a crime he didn't commit. The arrogant patrol officer sneers, thinking he's just bagged another easy target in a quiet suburban town. But what this officer doesn't know is that the 16-year-old boy bleeding on the linoleum floor has a father. And that father isn't just a regular civilian. He's a highly decorated FBI special agent, and he is already on his way. The town of Oak Creek, Pennsylvania, was the kind of working-class suburb where the neon signs of fast food joints and auto repair shops cut through the heavy autumn fog. It was a Friday night. The high school football game had just let out, and the local teenagers were flocking to their usual haunts. For 16-year-old Ty Jackson, that meant a booth at the back of Ruby's Diner. Ty was a good kid and honor roll student, the star anchor for the high school track team, and a boy who spent most of his weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. He was sitting across from his best friend, Toby Henderson, a lanky kid with a mop of curly blonde hair who was currently trying to devour a double cheeseburger in under 3 minutes. "I'm telling you, man, Coach is going to start me next week," Toby mumbled, a stray piece of lettuce falling onto his plate. Ty laughed, taking a sip of his vanilla milkshake. "Toby, you tripped over the hurdles in practice twice yesterday. Coach is going to put you in a padded room, not the starting lineup." The atmosphere in Ruby's was loud, filled with the clatter of silverware, the hiss of the fryer, and the jukebox in the corner playing classic rock. Brenda Walsh, the diner's manager, a woman in her late 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and a stained pink apron, navigated the narrow aisles with pots of black coffee, greeting the regulars by name. It was a safe place, or at least it was supposed to be. 10 miles away, in the heart of downtown Philadelphia, Ty's father was entirely unaware of his son's evening. Special Agent David Jackson was a man whose reputation preceded him. A 20-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, David led a joint terrorism task force. He was a man of intense focus, sharp intellect, and an uncompromising moral compass. Standing at 6'2", with broad shoulders and a gaze that could strip a suspect of their lies in seconds, David commanded respect. But at home, he was just a father trying to raise a young black man in a world that could often be unforgiving. He had given Ty the talk more times than he could count. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. Do not argue. Survive the encounter, and let me handle the rest. Ty knew the rules by heart. He had never had a reason to use them. Outside the fog-streaked windows of Ruby's Diner, a black and white Oak Creek Police Department cruiser rolled into the parking lot, its tires crunching over the loose gravel. Inside sat Officer Bradley Miller. Miller was a 10-year veteran of the local force, a man with a thick neck, a permanent scowl, and a notorious chip on his shoulder. He had a reputation among the town's minority residents for being overly aggressive, quick to escalate, and eager to assert his dominance. Beside him was his partner, rookie officer Kevin Davis, barely 6 months out of the academy, and still idealistic enough to believe their job was strictly about helping cats out of trees and stopping robberies. "Dispatch says a shoplifter hit the convenience store 3 blocks down," Miller grunted, checking the terminal mounted to the dashboard. "Suspect described as a young black male, dark hoodie, jeans, fled on foot." Davis leaned forward, squinting through the rain-spattered windshield. "That's a pretty vague description, Brad. Half the kids at the high school wear dark hoodies and jeans." "Yeah. Well, let's see who's hiding out in the diner," Miller said, shifting the cruiser into park and unbuckling his duty belt. "Criminals are stupid, kid. They run 2 blocks, get hungry, and think they're safe. Come on." As the diner bell chimed, signaling the officer's entrance, The ambient noise in Ruby's dipped slightly. A police presence always commanded a shift in the room's energy. Ty glanced up from his fries, his eyes landing on the two officers. He was wearing his favorite dark blue track hoodie and a pair of faded denim jeans. He thought nothing of it. He had been sitting in this exact booth for the last 45 minutes. Miller's eyes swept the room, gliding past the booth of elderly men drinking decaf, past a young couple sharing a slice of pie, until they locked onto the back corner. They locked onto Ty. A slow, predatory smirk crept onto Miller's face. He tapped his partner's chest with the back of his hand. "Told you. Easy pickings." The heavy thud of Officer Miller's boots against the checkered linoleum floor seemed to drown out the jukebox. Ty felt a strange prickle at the back of his neck as the two officers stopped directly at the edge of his table. Toby, oblivious and mid-bite, finally looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Can we help you, officers?" Toby asked, his voice muffled by French fries. Miller ignored the white teenager completely, his gaze fixed dead on Ty. "Stand up," Miller ordered, his voice a low, gravelly bark that carried an immediate threat. Ty's heart skipped a beat. The diner around him seemed to freeze. He remembered his father's voice clear and steady in his mind. "Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly, slowly, deliberately." Ty placed both of his hands flat on the Formica table. "Is there a problem, sir?" Ty asked, keeping his voice level and respectful. "I said stand the hell up," Miller repeated, stepping closer, his hand resting casually but purposefully on the butt of his taser. "Hey, what's going on?" Toby interjected, dropping his burger. "We're just eating." "Shut your mouth, kid, before I run you in for interfering," Miller snapped at Toby before turning his aggressive posture entirely back to Ty. "You match the description of a suspect involved in a strong-armed robbery down the street. Get out of the booth now." "Robbery?" Ty's eyes widened slightly, though he kept his hands perfectly still. "Sir, I've been sitting here for almost an hour. You can ask Brenda, the manager. I haven't been anywhere near a convenience store." Officer Davis, the rookie, shifted uncomfortably, glancing nervously at the manager. Brenda, who was already making her way down the aisle, a coffee pot in her hand. Brad," Davis muttered under his breath. "Maybe we should just check his ID and talk to the staff." "I don't need you to tell me how to do my job, Davis," Miller hissed. He reached into the booth, grabbed Ty by the fabric of his hoodie, and yanked him roughly out of the seat. The sudden violence sent Ty's vanilla milkshake crashing to the floor, glass shattering and white liquid pooling over the black and white tiles. Ty stumbled, trying to catch his balance, but Miller didn't give him a chance. With a violent shove, Miller slammed the 16-year-old face first into the edge of the adjacent counter. Pain exploded across Ty's cheekbone as his face connected with the hard surface. "Hey, get your hands off him!" Toby screamed, jumping up from the booth. "Back off!" Davis yelled, stepping between Toby and his partner, though the rookie looked terrified, his hand hovering uncertainly over his pepper spray. "Stop it! What are you doing to that boy?" Brenda shouted, abandoning her coffee pot on a nearby table. "Ty is a good kid. He's been here since 7. Back away, lady." "He's resisting!" Miller roared, though Ty was doing absolutely nothing of the sort. Ty's mind was racing, adrenaline flooding his system. He could feel the cold metal of Miller's forearm pressing violently against the back of his neck, pinning his face to the counter. He could taste the metallic tang of blood in his mouth where he had bitten the inside of his cheek. "Do not fight back," his father's voice echoed. "Survive." "I am not resisting, sir," Ty gasped out, his voice tight with pain but remarkably controlled. "My ID is in my right back pocket. I am not a threat." Instead of de-escalating, Ty's calm demeanor seemed to infuriate Miller further. The officer was used to panic, to fear, to anger. He thrived on it, used it to justify his brutality. The fact that this kid was keeping his cool felt like an insult to Miller's authority. "Stop running your mouth!" Miller snarled. He swept Ty's legs out from under him. The teenager hit the hard floor with a sickening thud. Before Ty could even draw breath, Miller dropped his full body weight, driving his knee directly into the center of Ty's spine. The air rushed out of Ty's lungs in a pained wheeze. He felt his arms being violently wrenched behind his back, the ball and socket joints of his shoulders screaming in agony. The unmistakable sharp click of steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, biting deep into the skin. "Suspect injured," Miller announced breathlessly, looking up at the horrified patrons of the diner with a look of twisted triumph. Brenda was in tears, dialing her phone. Toby was being held back by Davis, yelling obscenities at Miller. Ty lay on the cold floor, his vision swimming, his chest burning as he struggled to inflate his lungs under the crushing weight of the officer's knee. He closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He wasn't going to die tonight. He was going to survive. And then his father was going to find out. Miller yanked Ty up by the chain of the handcuffs, ignoring the boy's involuntary winces of pain. "Let's go, tough guy. You're going to jail." The Oak Creek Police Department precinct was a cinder block building that smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap bleach. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an irritating, relentless hum. Ty sat on a hard wooden bench inside a holding cell. His hands were finally cuffed in front of him instead of behind his back. His face throbbed fiercely. The right side of his cheek was swollen, sporting a dark, ugly purple bruise and dried blood crusted at the corner of his split lip. His favorite track hoodie was torn at the shoulder, stained with the spilled milkshake and diner floor grime. Despite the physical pain and the overwhelming humiliation, Ty's expression remained stoic. Down the hall, he could hear Officer Miller joking with the desk sergeant, a heavyset man named Sergeant Higgins. "Kid thought he was smart. Gave me that calm robotic crap. Put him down for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and assaulting a police officer. Let the detective sort out the robbery charge." "Assaulting an officer?" Higgins asked, sounding mildly skeptical. "He hit you, Brad." "He braced against the counter and elbowed me when I tried to detain him." Miller lied smoothly. "Davis saw the whole thing. Right, Kev?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause before Rookie Officer Davis muttered a quiet, shameful, "Yeah, right." Inside the cell, Ty took a slow, deep breath. He knew how the system worked. He knew how quickly a lie could become a permanent record. An officer had approached his cell holding a heavy plastic landline receiver. "You get one call, kid. Make it count," the officer grunted, passing the phone through the steel bars. Ty took the phone with trembling, manacled hands. He didn't need to look up a number. He dialed the 10 digits from muscle memory. The line rang once, twice. 30 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room at the FBI field office, Special Agent David Jackson was standing at the head of a long table surrounded by federal prosecutors and senior agents. They were deep into the tactical planning of a multi-state RICO indictment. The room was tense, the stakes high. When David's secure mobile phone buzzed on the table, he glanced at the caller ID. It was an unknown local number. Ordinarily, he would ignore it. But David had a strict rule. If his son was out, he answered every call. He held up a hand, silencing the room of powerful federal officials. "Jackson," he answered, his voice a low baritone. "Dad?" A single father named that would unravel his entire position. The seasoned FBI agent vanished, replaced instantly by a father whose instincts were suddenly screaming. Ty's voice wasn't just shaky. It carried the hollow, compressed echo of a holding cell. David had heard that acoustic backdrop 1,000 times from suspects. "Ty, where are you?" David's voice dropped an octave, the temperature in the conference room seeming to plummet alongside it. The other agents in the room exchanged worried glances. "I'm at the Oak Creek Police Department," Ty said softly. He winced as his split lips stretched. "Dad, I didn't do anything. I was at Ruby's with Toby." An officer came in. He said I matched a description of a robbery suspect. David's jaw clenched. "Are you hurt?" It wasn't a question. It was an extraction of tactical intelligence. Ty hesitated. He didn't want to worry his father, but he had been trained to report the facts. "He threw me into the counter, Dad. Busted my lip. Put his knee in my back. They charged me with resisting and assaulting an officer." The silence on the line was deafening to Ty. It felt like an eternity. To the agents in the conference room, they watched as their commanding officer's face turned into a mask of pure, terrifying, calculated wrath. "Who is the officer?" "Ty?" David asked, his voice now dangerously quiet, devoid of all emotion. "His name tag." "Bradley Miller." "Did you fight back? Did you argue?" "No, sir," Ty replied instantly. "I kept my hands visible. I spoke clearly, just like you taught me." David closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. "I know you did, son. Listen to me very carefully. Do not say another word to anyone in that building. Do not accept a glass of water. Do not answer casual questions. You sit there and you wait." "I'm leaving now." "Okay, Dad." David hung up the phone. He looked around the conference room at the federal prosecutors and elite agents staring at him. He calmly unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the FBI-issued Glock 19 resting in its holster at his hip. He reached down and clipped his gold shield from his belt and placed it on a silver chain, hanging it around his neck so it rested prominently against his chest. "Agent Jackson, is everything all right?" asked Supervisory Special Agent Reynolds, breaking the silence. David picked up his keys. "Gentlemen, the briefing is paused. A local PD officer in Oak Creek just assaulted my son and manufactured felony charges against him." The room stiffened. Everyone in that room knew David Jackson. They knew his integrity, and they knew his protective nature over his boy. "Do you need backup, Dave?" Reynolds asked, standing up, his own hand drifting toward his badge. "No," David said coldly, walking toward the door. "But Oak Creek PD is going to need a lawyer and a medic." The drive from Philadelphia to Oak Creek took 40 minutes. David did it in 22, his dark, unmarked SUV tearing through the rain-slicked highway with its discreet grille lights flashing blue and red, cutting through the traffic like a scalpel. His mind was a tempest of rage, but his exterior was absolute ice. He didn't know Officer Bradley Miller, but by the time he parked his SUV diagonally across 2 spaces right in front of the precinct's blast doors, David Jackson already knew exactly how he was going to dismantle the man's life, career, and freedom. David stepped out into the rain, the heavy oak doors of the Oak Creek Police Department looming ahead. He didn't bother to knock or ease his way in. He pushed through the double doors with enough force to crack the hinges, the gold FBI shield gleaming under the harsh lobby lights. The real storm had just arrived in Oak Creek. The heavy oak doors of the Oak Creek Police Department didn't just open. They shuddered under the force of Special Agent David Jackson's entrance. The gust of wind and rain that followed him into the sterile fluorescent-lit lobby seemed to carry the very fury he was keeping bottled behind his stoic expression. The water dripped from his tailored charcoal suit, pooling on the cheap linoleum floor. But it wasn't the rain that caught the attention of Desk Sergeant Higgins. It was the gleaming gold FBI shield hanging prominently over David's chest, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Higgins, a 20-year veteran who had spent the last decade comfortably riding a desk, instinctively sat up straighter. He placed his half-eaten donut down on a napkin, the sugar suddenly turning to ash in his mouth. He recognized the aura of a federal agent from a mile away, but the man standing before him carried an authority that felt uniquely dangerous. "Can I help you, Agent?" Higgins started, his voice lacking its usual gruff authority. David didn't stop until he was inches from the bulletproof glass partition. His dark eyes locked onto Higgins with the precision of a laser sight. "Special Agent David Jackson, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Joint Terrorism Task Force. You are currently holding a 16-year-old boy named Ty Jackson in your cells." "Oh, the Mao." Higgins swallowed hard, his eyes darting down to the intake ledger. "Jackson. Yeah, we brought a kid in about an hour ago. Strong-armed robbery suspect. Also caught resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Charges. Look, Agent Jackson, I don't know what your connection is, but you being a Fed doesn't change local jurisdiction. The arresting officers are still processing the paperwork." "He is my son," David said. His voice wasn't raised. It was a terrifying deadpan whisper that resonated through the small lobby. "And you are going to bring him out here now?" "Sir, I can't just release a suspect because his dad flashes a badge," Higgins stammered, though his hand nervously hovered over the buzzer that unlocked the secure corridor. "Standard procedure dictates." "Sergeant Higgins, let me clarify your current reality," David interrupted, leaning closer to the glass. "I am not here asking for a professional courtesy. I am here because an officer under your roof has committed a federal crime under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. You are currently acting as an accessory to the false imprisonment and battery of a minor. Now you can either hit that buzzer and bring my son out here, or I can make a phone call to Robert Kessler at the DOJ Civil Rights Division, and within the hour, a federal tactical team will rip the doors off this precinct and arrest everyone in this building for obstruction. What's it going to be?" Higgins stared at the man, the blood draining from his face. He had heard the rumors of federal overreach, but the absolute, unwavering certainty in David's eyes told him that this was not a bluff. Higgins pressed the red button under his desk. The heavy steel door adjacent to the desk buzzed loudly and clicked open. I'll go get him," Higgins muttered, abandoning his post and scurrying down the hall. David paced the short length of the lobby, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. A few agonizing minutes later, footsteps echoed down the corridor. When Ty stepped into the light of the lobby, the fragile dam holding back David's emotions nearly cracked. His son, his brilliant, kind-hearted boy, looked small. The right side of Ty's face was horribly swollen, a deep purple contusion blooming across his cheekbone, a thin line of dried blood snaking down from his split lip. His favorite track hoodie was torn and dirty, but worse than the physical injuries was the look in Ty's eyes, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and profound humiliation. "Dad," Ty whispered, his voice trembling slightly. David closed the distance instantly, wrapping his arms around his son in a fierce, protective embrace. He didn't care who was watching. He pressed his face into Ty's shoulder, taking a ragged breath. "I've got you, Ty. I'm right here. It's over." As David pulled back to inspect his son's face, a new voice echoed from the hallway. Loud, arrogant, and entirely oblivious to the shifting power dynamics in the room. "Hey, Higgins, where the hell are you taking my prisoner?" The air fell dead. Officer Bradley Miller strolled into the lobby, a steaming cup of break room coffee in his hand. He was smirking, entirely satisfied with his evening's work. Rookie Officer Kevin Davis trailed half a step behind him, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. Miller stopped short when he saw David inspecting Ty's injuries. He looked at the tall man in the suit, then noticed the gold badge hanging from his neck. Miller scoffed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Let me guess. You're the dad." Miller sneered, stepping into the lobby with an arrogant swagger. "Look, buddy, I don't care if you're local PD, FBI, or the President of the United States. Your kid assaulted a police officer. He's going to juvie. And you flashing your tin isn't going to change that." David slowly turned away from Ty. The warmth and vulnerability he had just shown his son vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. He stepped dynamically toward Miller, invading the officer's personal space until they were chest to chest. David was 3 inches taller, and his physical presence was overwhelming. "You're Officer Miller," David stated, a cold fact rather than a question. "Yeah, and you're interfering with a police investigation," Miller shot back, trying to maintain his bravado, though he instinctively took a half-step backward. "I am the investigation," David replied, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet cadence. "You arrested my son for a strong-armed robbery at Ruby's Diner." "Correct." He matched the description: dark-hooded jeans, fled on foot. "But fascinating police work," David said, his tone dripping with acidic sarcasm. "Except there's a rather glaring chronological impossibility in your report, Officer Miller. I had my field office pull the local dispatch logs on my way here." David reached into his suit jacket, pulling out his smartphone, and tapped the screen. "You called in my son's arrest at exactly 8:14 p.m., David continued, holding the screen up so Miller could see the digital timestamp from the Oak Creek dispatch server. However, the 911 call reporting the robbery at Ruby's was logged by your own dispatch at 8:19 p.m., 5 minutes after you threw a 16-year-old boy against a counter. The color rapidly drained from Miller's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly. "Care to explain to me, Officer Miller?" David whispered, his voice slicing through the silence like a razor. "How my son managed to travel 5 minutes into the future, commit a felony, and return to the diner to be assaulted by you?" Rookie Officer Davis let out a quiet, strangled gasp, stepping away from his partner as if Miller had suddenly caught fire. It was a typo by dispatch," Miller stammered, the arrogance totally evaporating, replaced by the frantic backpedaling of a trapped rat. "He resisted arrest. He elbowed me. I had lawful grounds to detain him under suspicious behavior." "He elbowed you," David repeated flatly. He turned his piercing gaze to Rookie Davis. "Is that what happened, Officer Davis? Did my son, who weighs 140 pounds soaking wet, physically attack a 200-pound veteran officer?" Davis swallowed hard, looking at the floor, then at Ty's bruised face, and finally up at the furious FBI agent. I think very carefully about your next words, son," David warned Davis, his tone oddly paternal but laced with absolute consequence. "Because lying to a federal agent in the course of an investigation is a felony that will ensure you serve your time in a federal penitentiary rather than a state one. Did my son assault your partner?" The silence in the precinct was deafening. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass doors. Davis squeezed his eyes shut. "No, sir," the rookie whispered, his voice cracking. "He didn't do anything. He was just eating his food. Brad just grabbed him." "Shut up, Kevin!" Miller roared, turning on his partner. "You sniveling little coward! You're going to rat on your own." Miller never finished the sentence. With terrifying speed, David's hand shot out, grabbing Miller by the front of his Kevlar vest and slamming him backward against the cinder-block wall of the lobby. The coffee cup hit the floor, splattering dark liquid across the tiles. Miller grunted. The wind knocked out of him as David pinned him to the wall. "You speak to him again, and I will arrest you for witness tampering on top of battery, false imprisonment, and perjury," David snarled. All pretenses of bureaucratic calm finally shattering. "You put your hands on my son. You bled my boy. You are a disgrace to that badge. And by the time the sun comes up, I'm going to make sure you never wear it again." "What the hell is going on out here?" The booming voice came from the staircase leading to the administrative offices. Chief Thomas O'Connor, a heavy-set man with a thick white mustache and the tired eyes of a career administrator, hurried down the steps. He had been in his office finalizing the municipal budget when the shouting erupted. O'Connor froze when he saw an FBI agent pinning one of his senior patrol officers to the wall. "Chief," Miller gasped, struggling uselessly against David's iron grip. "Get this maniac off me! He's assaulting an officer!" David didn't let go immediately. He held Miller's gaze for 3 long, agonizing seconds, ensuring the disgraced cop understood exactly who held his life in his hands, before releasing his vest in a gesture of utter disgust. David turned to face the police chief, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. "Chief O'Connor?" David said, his voice returning to its terrifyingly composed equilibrium. "I am Special Agent David Jackson. This man," he pointed a rigid finger at Miller, "violently assaulted my minor son in a public establishment, falsified an arrest report to cover his tracks, and fabricated felony charges. Your rookie officer here has just confessed to the entire cover-up." O'Connor looked from the imposing federal agent to the battered face of the teenage boy standing by the desk, then to Miller, and finally to a pale, trembling Davis. The chief felt a massive migraine blooming behind his eyes. He knew exactly who David Jackson was. The man was a legend in federal law enforcement circles in Pennsylvania, known for his relentless pursuit of corrupt officials. "Agent Jackson," O'Connor started, raising his hands defensively. "Let's all take a breath. If Officer Miller acted out of line, we have an internal affairs division that will handle this strictly by the book. We can get your son checked out by a medic. Drop the charges. And internal affairs?" David let out a short, humorless laugh that sent a chill down O'Connor's spine. "Chief, we are light years past an internal administrative review. This is not a departmental infraction. This is a federal civil rights violation." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. "While I was driving here, I had my cyber division contact Brenda Walsh, the manager at Ruby's Diner. She gladly granted federal authorities immediate remote access to their cloud-based security system. Would you like to see what happened at 8:14 p.m. tonight?" Miller's face turned the color of old parchment. "Chief, you can't let him," Miller quieted. O'Connor snapped, his own dread rising. He walked over to David, looking down at the small screen. David pressed play. The high-definition footage was utterly damning. It showed Ty sitting calmly in the booth. It showed Miller approaching aggressively. It captured the exact moment Ty placed his hands flat on the table in a gesture of total compliance. And then it showed the brutal, unprovoked violence. Miller yanking the boy from the booth, the violent shove into the counter, the sickening knee drop to the spine of a prone, unresisting teenager. O'Connor watched the loop play twice. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. It was a career-ending video, not just for Miller, but potentially for O'Connor if he mishandled the fallout. "As you can see," David continued, pocketing his phone, "there was no robbery. There was no resisting. There was only a predator with a badge looking for a victim he thought had no voice. Unfortunately for him, he chose the wrong kid." I thought he had a weapon," Miller tried to lie, stammering pathetically. He reached for his waistband. The video showed his hands on the table. Assistant United States Attorney William Danvers would later note in federal court. But for now, David just looked at Miller with absolute contempt. "You are a liar," David said simply. He turned to the chief. "Chief O'Connor, you have a choice to make right here, right now. You can arrest this man for aggravated assault and false imprisonment under state law, or I can walk out to my SUV, retrieve my federal cuffs, and arrest him under federal civil rights statutes. Either way, Bradley Miller is leaving this building in chains." O'Connor didn't hesitate. He looked at Sergeant Higgins, who was still standing rigidly behind the desk. "Higgins, get me a set of cuffs." Miller stepped back. Absolute panic finally setting in. "Chief, you can't be serious. I've been on this force for 10 years. I've put my life on the line for this town. You're going to take the word of some Fed over me." "I'm taking the word of the video camera," Brad O'Connor said heavily, taking the steel handcuffs from Higgins. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "No!" Miller shouted, stepping toward the exit. "This is a setup. This is bull." Before Miller could make a run for the door, Rookie Officer Davis stepped into his path, his hand resting firmly on his taser. The young officer's face was pale, but his jaw was set with newfound resolve. "Don't do it, Brad. Just turn around." Betrayed by his partner, abandoned by his chief, and cornered by an unstoppable force, the fight completely drained out of Bradley Miller. His shoulder slumped. Slowly, he turned around, crossing his wrists behind his back. The distinct click-click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent lobby, a poetic mirror to the sound Ty had endured just an hour prior. "Bradley Miller, you are under arrest," Chief O'Connor recited, his voice monotone. "You have the right to remain silent." David didn't stay to listen to the Miranda warning. He turned his back on the disgraced cop, dismissing him from his reality entirely. He walked back over to Ty, placing a gentle hand on his son's uninjured shoulder. "Are we done here, Dad?" Ty asked softly, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "We're done here, son. Let's go home." David guided Ty out of the suffocating atmosphere of the precinct and into the cool, rainy night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, cleansing breeze. They walked in silence to the black SUV. David opened the passenger door for his son, a gesture of profound respect and care. Once they were both inside, sitting in the quiet hum of the running engine, the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving behind the raw, emotional toll of the evening. Ty leaned his head back against the headrest, wincing slightly as the swollen side of his face touched the leather. David looked at him, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I am so proud of you, Ty," David said, his voice thick with emotion. He no longer had to hide. "You did everything right. You survived. I'm sorry you had to go through this, but you handled yourself like a man." Ty looked over at his father, a small, painful smile touching his uninjured lip. "I had a good teacher." David reached out, squeezing his son's shoulder. The fight wasn't completely over. There would be lawsuits, federal hearings, and media circuses in the days to come. The United States Attorney's Office would make an example out of Miller, ensuring he spent the next decade in a federal facility. But tonight, The only thing that mattered was that his boy was safe. David put the SUV in drive, pulling out of the precinct parking lot, leaving the flashing lights and shattered career of Bradley Miller in the rearview mirror. The morning after the arrest, Oak Creek woke up to a media firestorm. The video of Ty's assault at Ruby's Diner had been legally obtained by the prosecution and inevitably leaked to the local news stations by an anonymous courthouse clerk. By noon, news vans were parked on the lawn of the Oak Creek Police Department. Officer Bradley Miller, now suspended without pay and out on a $50,000 bail, was not going down without a fight. He hired Arthur Pendleton, a ruthless, high-priced defense attorney from Philadelphia, known for defending dirty cops and smearing victims. Pendleton immediately went to work attempting to control the narrative, holding a press conference where he painted Miller as a proactive hero dealing with a hostile and non-compliant suspect in a high-crime area. But Special Agent David Jackson was 10 steps ahead. He knew that monsters like Miller rarely committed isolated acts of abuse. A cop brazen enough to assault a kid in a crowded diner and force his rookie partner to cover it up had been bending the rules for a long time. David requested a temporary reassignment, teaming up with Special Agent Valerie Reyes from the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit. Together, they began to peel back the layers of Miller's 10-year career. What they found turned a straightforward police brutality case into a sprawling federal conspiracy. Late one Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after the assault, David and Valerie were in the FBI field office staring at a corkboard covered in financial statements, local business records, and dispatch logs. "Look at this," Valerie said, tapping a red pen against a bank statement. "Miller makes $65,000 a year. But his ex-wife is receiving $4,000 a month in alimony. He drives a brand new $80,000 truck, and he just put a down payment on a boat. The math doesn't work." David crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the locations of Miller's most frequent patrol stops. "He's shaking people down. Look at the businesses he frequents. Small, cash-heavy operations. Independent auto shops and diners." David's finger stopped on a photograph of Ruby's Diner. A sinking realization washed over him. He pulled out his phone and dialed Brenda Walsh, the manager of Ruby's. "Brenda, it's Agent Jackson," David said when she answered. "I need you to tell me the truth. Did Officer Miller ever ask you for money?" There was a long, heavy silence on the line. When Brenda finally spoke, her voice was trembling. "He called it a security tax, David. $500 a month in cash. If we paid, he kept the drunks and vagrants away. If we didn't, he promised to make our lives a living hell. I paid him for 2 years, but with inflation, the diner was struggling. I told him last month I couldn't pay anymore." David's jaw tightened. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. The night Ty was arrested, Miller wasn't looking for a robbery suspect. "No," Brenda sobbed. "He was sending me a message. He chose the most vulnerable kid in the diner, arrested him, and destroyed half my counter just to show me what happens when I cut off his money." Ty was just a pawn to him. The twist hit David like a physical blow. His son hadn't just been the victim of racial profiling and a power-tripping cop. Ty had been collateral damage in a mob-style extortion racket run by a man sworn to protect the community. The next morning, David and Valerie paid a visit to rookie officer Kevin Davis. They didn't go to the precinct. They cornered him at a quiet park near his apartment. Davis looked haggard, having lost weight and sleep since the incident. "Officer Davis?" Valerie said, flashing her badge. "We know about the protection money. We know about the Ruby's dispatch being faked. If you go down with Miller, you will serve federal time for racketeering under the RICO Act. If you cooperate, the U.S. Attorney is willing to offer you immunity." Davis collapsed onto a park bench, burying his face in his hands. He told me it was just how things worked in Oak Creek. Davis wept. He said if I blew the whistle, he planted narcotics in my locker and ruined my life. I'll tell you everything. I have a ledger. I kept records of every drop-off he made me witness. With Davis flipped, the trap was fully set. Arthur Pendleton's smear campaign against Ty Jackson was about to hit a titanium wall of federal evidence. The gavels had fallen, and Bradley Miller was behind bars. But Special Agent David Jackson knew better than to believe a single conviction could sanitize a polluted stream. In his 20 years with the Bureau, David had learned a hard, uncomfortable truth. Dirty cops rarely operate in a vacuum. They survive because the ecosystem protects them. 3 weeks after Miller was transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, David sat in his Philadelphia office, staring at the Oak Creek file. The extortion ring at Ruby's Diner was solved, but the financial math still bothered him. Miller had been pulling in nearly $5,000 a month in illicit cash from various local businesses. Yet his bank accounts, seized by the feds, only showed a fraction of that wealth. Special Agent Valerie Reyes warped into David's office, dropping a thick manila folder onto his desk. Her expression was grim. "You were right to keep digging, Dave," Valerie said, pulling up a chair. "I had the forensic accountants trace the shell company Miller was using to pay his ex-wife's alimony. It's an LLC called Keystone Security Consulting." "Let me guess," David muttered, opening the file. "It's not just Miller's name on the incorporation papers. Not even close. The LLC is registered to a trust fund managed by a man named Peter Gallagher." Valerie leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger on a highlighted line of text. "Peter Gallagher is the brother-in-law of Oak Creek Police Chief Thomas O'Connor. We subpoenaed the LLC's ledgers. Miller wasn't keeping all the protection money, Dave. He was kicking 60% of it up the ladder. Chief O'Connor has been taking a cut of the extortion money for the last 5 years. A cold, heavy silence filled the office. David thought back to the night at the precinct. He remembered O'Connor's haste to arrest Miller once the video was played. At the time, it looked like a chief doing the right thing under pressure. Now, David realized O'Connor was simply cutting off a diseased limb to save his own career and his freedom. "Get us Attorney Danvers on the line," David said, standing up and reaching for his suit jacket. "Then call the tactical team. Chief O'Connor announced his early retirement yesterday. He's packing up his office as we speak. I think we need to throw him a farewell party." Ah. An hour later, a convoy of unmarked black SUVs rolled quietly into the Oak Creek municipal lot. This time, there were no flashing lights or blaring sirens. There was only the calculated, silent precision of a federal raid. Chief Thomas O'Connor was placing a framed photograph of his boat into a cardboard box when his office door swung open. He looked up, expecting to see a local lieutenant, but his blood ran cold when he saw David Jackson standing in the doorway, flanked by Valerie Reyes and 2 heavily armed FBI agents wearing tactical vests. "Agent Jackson," O'Connor stammered, dropping the photograph. "What is the meaning of this?" "I'm retiring. I have nothing left to say about the Miller case." "This isn't about Miller, Tom," David said, his voice entirely devoid of the simmering rage he had carried the night Ty was arrested. Instead, it was replaced by a chilling clinical authority. "This is about Keystone Security Consulting." O'Connor's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk to steady himself. I don't know what you're talking about." "Save it for the judge." Valerie stepped forward, slapping a federal warrant onto the desk. "Thomas O'Connor, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit extortion, wire fraud, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." And as the federal agents moved in to place the handcuffs on the chief of police, David walked over to the large glass window overlooking the town of Oak Creek. He watched the citizens going about their day, unaware that the very institution sworn to protect them had been bleeding them dry. By nightfall, the Department of Justice announced a federal consent decree, effectively placing the entire Oak Creek Police Department under federal oversight. Mayor Richard Langford was forced to hold an emergency press conference, promising sweeping reforms. The rot had been dug out by its roots. The town was finally going to heal. Late May brought a fierce, humid heat to central Pennsylvania, but the atmosphere inside the stadium at Shippensburg University was electric. It was the final day of the Pennsylvania State Track and Field Championships, and the stands were packed with thousands of screaming parents, college scouts, and classmates. Down on the bright red synthetic track, 16-year-old Ty Jackson was stretching his hamstrings. The heavy dark bruises that had marred his face 6 months ago were completely gone, leaving only his smooth, dark skin. But the internal healing had taken much longer. For weeks after the assault, Ty had struggled with nightmares. He had flinched at the sound of sirens. He had felt a lingering heavy anxiety whenever he walked into a public space. But out here on the track, Ty was free. Out here, there was no profiling, no corruption, and no injustice. There was only the gun, the lane, and the clock. Ty's best friend, Toby Henderson, walked over, tossing Ty a water bottle. Toby was running the third leg of the 4x100-meter relay, and he looked like he was about to vomit from nerves. "You good, man?" Toby asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Those guys from North Alabama look like they eat raw meat for breakfast." Ty laughed, a genuine joyful sound that cut through the competitive tension. "Let them eat whatever they want. Toby, just get the baton to me. I'll handle the rest." Up in the bleachers, sitting a few rows back from the finish line, David Jackson watched his son. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and sunglasses, entirely unrecognizable as the terrifying federal agent who had dismantled a police precinct. Today, he was just a dad. "Runners, take your marks!" The stadium announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. David leaned forward, his heart hammering in his chest. He watched as the starting gun cracked. The runners exploded off the blocks. The first 2 legs of the relay were a brutal dogfight. Oak Creek was trailing in 3rd place as the baton was passed to Toby. To Toby's credit, he ran the curve of his life, his lanky legs pumping furiously, closing the gap slightly before thrusting the aluminum baton into Ty's waiting hand. The moment Ty's fingers closed around the metal, something shifted. All the anger, the humiliation on the diner floor, the fear in the holding cell, Ty funneled it all directly into the track. He accelerated with a raw, explosive power that brought the entire stadium to its feet. "Come on, Ty!" David roared, jumping up from his seat, gripping the metal railing. "Go!" Ty passed the runner from Central Bucks in a blur. He was closing in on the anchor from North Alabama, his spikes tearing into the rubber surface. With 20 meters left, he pulled even. His form was flawless, his breathing perfectly synchronized, his eyes locked dead on the finish line. With a final agonizing push, Ty surged ahead, crossing the finish line a fraction of a second before his opponent. The stadium erupted. Toby tackled Ty from behind, sending them both tumbling onto the high jump mats in a chaotic mess of laughter and cheers. When Ty finally broke free from his celebrating teammates, he looked up into the stands. He locked eyes with his father. David was smiling, tears openly streaming down his face behind his sunglasses. He gave his son a slow, deliberate salute. Ty smiled back, tapping his chest right over his heart. The system had tried to break Tyrone Jackson. A corrupt badge had tried to steal his dignity, and the broken department had tried to steal his future. But they had failed. Ty had survived. His father had brought the darkness into the light, and together they had won. As Ty walked off the track, a gold medal resting heavily against his chest, the afternoon sun cast a long, bright shadow behind him. The scars of the past would always be part of his story, but they would never define his destination. He was moving forward, and nobody was ever going to hold him down again. If you found yourself holding your breath during this intense, real-life story of corruption, survival, and a father's unstoppable quest for justice, we need your support to keep bringing these vital stories to light. The system only changes when we refuse to look away. Please hit that like button to help this video reach a wider audience. Share it with your friends and family to spread awareness, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping, true-to-life dramas. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching.